Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. Today I want to make a real quick video for your sorcerers out there that just want a build to use in order to do the Abattoir of Zir. It just got released today. Obviously with it being the first day that it came out, I do not have a perfect build for pushing. I only spent maybe 4 hours like pushing, trying to go as high as I possibly could. The highest that I was able to complete was a 12 and I didn't want to go further than that. The first time that I completed it, I did not loot the thing on the ground because my inventory was full, and then I went and did it again and I like barely finished it in time, but the timer ran out anyways, even though I had killed the mob, which you can see, and then I didn't get the completion. So I was like, screw this, whatever. There's not really a reason in pushing. If you want a build designed for pushing, let me know down in the comments and I will work on that. But the main reason to actually do the Abattoir of Zir is simply just to get this glyph, the Tears of Blood glyph, which is a massive damage increase. Mine isn't leveled up that much and currently is giving me an 82% multiplicative damage increase. It is just a visual bug that it says that it is additive, but it's currently an 82% multiplicative damage increase. Leveling this up is the only reason to actually do the Abattoir of Zir. And if you're trying to push higher tiers, it's extremely inefficient if you're trying to just level up this glyph. Currently, the XP requirement to level up the glyph is unbelievably insane and it is extremely expensive. Even if they decide to not reduce it, there isn't really a better option to level this up other than to just intentionally do lower tiers that you can do very quickly with pretty much 0% chance of failure. So in this video, I'm going to show you guys what build I would recommend for doing basically tier 6s and tier 7s is what I've landed on as the most efficient glyph XP per hour, while being capable of doing it in about 2 to 2.5 minutes on average with pretty much 0% chance of failure. Your mileage may vary depending upon your build, your individual gear, etc. But I'm just going to show you guys the build for that because the whole purpose of doing the Abattoir, at least for me, is to level up Tears of Blood. So if your goal is to level this up, then you pretty much just want to use a build that's going to level this up very fast, and then you can just take that build into tier 100s or whatever and just absolutely dominate anyways. Before we get into things, I want to give a big thanks to today's sponsor, Prism XR, which offers a ton of high quality products for VR gaming, including the brand new Vega T1 wireless earbuds, designed specifically to give you crystal clear, high fidelity sound while gaming with ultra low latency. The Vega T1s offer a ton of cutting edge technology, including super pass-through fast charging, universal compatibility between all gaming devices with its Bluetooth and USB-C options, and even the ability to chat with friends while playing at the same time. The Vega T1 has everything you need to comfortably immerse yourself in your favorite VR game while having top-notch sound quality that you can even further customize within the Prism XR app, all for an extremely reasonable price. Check out the link in the description and use the promo code for a 10% discount until December 31st and treat yourself to a nice early Christmas present. Alright, getting into things, by the way, the entirety of the build will be posted over on Mobalytics, so whenever I make changes or I make multiple variations of the build for you guys, based on if you want to push or if you do or don't have Uber Uniques, etc., make sure to check that out, link in the description. I'm now partnered with them, so all of my builds in the future will be over on Mobalytics. A quick tip is that you're going to need a ton of sigil powder if you're trying to do this, especially if you want to limit test your build and just for fun see how high you can go. You're going to need a lot of sigil powder. Currently there's a bug, as you can see I have 480k. Currently there's a bug where if you craft tier 7s, you can see it only costs 1100 sigil powder, but then if you go to salvage it, it's actually going to give you 2250. So basically as long as you can get up to tier 7, which is really easy with this build, you can craft a ton of them. That was a few too many. And then you can just spam salvage them. And if you're on PC, you can salvage them pretty quickly. You can just press left click and then press enter. And if you're on console, your SOL, I guess, I don't know. And you can also just type craft 20 and you can just spam do this until you get, I think 1,000,000 is the cap on sigil powder. I just got to 500k and that should be more than enough. When it comes to which tier you actually want to farm, so I previously mentioned it a little bit, but for me personally, tier 6 seemed to be the tier where I was able to do it where I had pretty much 0% risk of failure. I never died on a tier 6 and I could very consistently do it in about 2 to 2.5 minutes. For me and the way that my build is currently set up, this was the most efficient glyph XP per hour. However, if your build was a little bit better, you could probably bump that up to tier 7 or even tier 8. The problem then becomes if you're able to actually do it with pretty much 0% risk of failure, because the second that you fail one time, it's just not worth it to do the higher tier, and it's more worth it to do an easier tier. You could also be the case that your build isn't as optimized as mine, and you may want to do like tier 5 or 4. The reason that we don't spam tier 1 or something is because we can very easily do a tier 5 in about 2 minutes, which is a little bit faster than we could do a tier, or a little bit slower than we could do a tier 1, but you get way more than double the glyph XP, sorry, tier 6. I believe a tier 6 gives you like 2400 or something like that. I'll just show it on screen. And a tier 1 gives you like 1000. Whereas for me, doing a tier 9 took twice as long, and I only got, I think it was 3500 XP from a tier 9, so it just was not worth it mathematically, but try it out yourself, see what works best for you. For most people, I would recommend in the range between tier 4 and tier 6 for speed farming. Alright, let's get into the build. Just to reiterate, this is a speed farming version for doing tier 4 to tier 8 around. You could easily take this to tier 10, but this is not a pushing build. Personally, when I did a tier 12 and completed it, I swapped over to a completely different build, and I would not recommend this build for pushing high tier Abattoir dungeons. However, you can very easily do, around 4 to 7s, and the point is to do it as fast as humanly possible. That is what this build is oriented for. If you're going into the Abattoir of Zir, I'm going to assume that you know a good bit about ball lightning, so I'm not going to go super in-depth with things. I'm going to pretty quickly explain things. If you've seen my previous videos, you know that I like to use a teleport enchant. If you're trying to speedrun, this is by far the best way to set up the build. Using the teleport enchant basically enables you to spam your teleport for a massive amount of mobility. You also get the 30% damage reduction permanently, and also in the Abattoir, killing mobs is very important. You want to kill everything, so sucking everything in together with the raiment chest and then taking advantage of damage versus stunned is incredibly powerful and very good for speed clearing. This is the single fastest version of the build, while also retaining a good amount of survivability so that you can do those tier 6s or whatever with pretty much zero risk of dying, right? Our other enchantment is going to be Chain Lightning. The reason for Chain Lightning, there's some workarounds to get vulnerable, but this is basically just to give us permanent uptime on vulnerable. It also gives us a little bit of mana back, and we are using the recharging aspect, so we get mana back every time that our Chain Lightning bounces. For our other spells, we have Unstable Currents just for whenever there's tanky elites, or we just want to melt the Bloodseekers. I have Firewall on my bar just to put fire on enemies because we are using Tal Rasha Ring. And also I have some damage to burning enemies, so pretty much I just use this against the Bloodseekers, which are pretty tanky. Ice Blades is on the bar for Tal Rashas as well. Flame Shield is for the immunity, and Teleport obviously. Quickly go over the skill tree, but honestly just check down in the description. I am using the Shaco with this build. If you do not have a Shaco, it's okay. Just put on a Godslayer crown. It really isn't a big difference. You might be a little bit slower, and you're going to have a little bit more survivability problems, but it's not a big deal. You should put 2 points into Firebolt, doesn't matter. Go into Elemental Dominance for damage. Teleport, max it out completely for the lower cooldown, and then you want to get the damage reduction whenever you teleport. That's very good. And then you go 1 into Elemental Tumult for a random reset. Glass Cannon, I actually maxed these out, but if you're dying ever, just take the points out and you get a massive amount of survivability from not using this, but it is a pretty good damage increase. So for me, I like to have it on. And then I have points into Mana Shield, points into Protection, and points into Align the Elements. I could take the points out of this. It's not really necessary, but I don't have much else to put my points into. I stopped putting them into Chain Lightning and Destructive because you spawn enough Crackling Energies anyways. You could put 1 point to Ice Blades if you don't have a Shaco. So you just take the point out of Align the Elements or conversely Glass Cannon. And then you go into Devouring Blaze. This is literally only for the Bloodseekers because you make them on fire by using Firewall, which you should have for free if you have an amulet with Ranks of Mastery skills. Max out Ball Lightning because this is all of our damage. Max out Static Discharge for the Crackling Energy spawns. I have no idea why I have points into this. That thing is bad. Dude, I haven't looked at my skill tree in forever, and I cannot believe I just had those 3 points there. Well, maybe it does a little bit of damage. Who knows? I don't really have anywhere else to put these points, to be honest. I could get some movement speed. Wow, that's funny. Maybe I would go into Flame Shield movement speed. I don't know. It doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. I'll have it in the link in the description. I'll figure it out. But for now, I'll just leave the 1 point there. Unstable Currents. This last point doesn't really matter, but might as well, because as you can see, I have an abundance of points, it seems. 1 into Cores and Currents. You don't want to max that out. And then you want Electrocution for damage reduction and Conduction for a little bit of movement speed. But you could argue that the movement speed is optional. I go into Essus Ferocity as this is still currently bugged and giving you a damage increase, a crit damage increase specifically, anytime that you just kill an elite. We are not fighting bosses, so we're not going to get this. The uptime on this is pretty low, but the damage increase from Veer's Mastery literally does not work, so either you go with something that gives you damage sometimes, or something that doesn't give you damage, but it does give you damage reduction. So if you're dying a lot, you would just take the points out of Glass Cannon and just go into this, and then you'd be fine. When it comes to our vampire powers, there's a little bit of variance here, but this is what I found to work for pretty much universally is very good. Ravenous for attack speed, Domination for damage to stunned, and everything is stunned every time that we just use our teleport. Undying for healing, guarantee. You could run without this, but it's just overall very consistent. Resilience, just for a bit of damage reduction. Again, you could argue this isn't necessary, but honestly, you don't have many other options. Infection is for a Taurasha to give us a poison damage proc, which is just 15% damage. Prey on the Weak is currently bugged. Sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work. So better to just not use it. The only other thing I'd maybe see you using is Anticipation, but not really worth it for this speed farming kind of stuff. Sanguine Brace I quite like, but you take a lot of damage, so it kind of, the Fortify gets knocked off pretty quickly. But you could argue that if your healing is fine without Undying, that you could use Sanguine Brace, or you may use it instead of Resilience for some of the easier tier stuff. I'd recommend you guys just play around with that. It's kind of difficult to quantify how good Resilience is sometimes, but Sanguine Brace is okay, just sometimes you're not going to have that Fortify up, but getting the damage reduction from Fortify is good, and getting the crit chance is nice. When it comes to our gear and uniques, I'm using a Shaco. Again, if you don't have one, it's perfectly fine. You can just use a Godslayer crown, or you can just use a normal helmet. And then, of course, we want to use a raiment. Something I am doing is I'm not maxing the upgrade on my raiment, just so it gives me one less rank of Glass Cannon. This is if I want to do higher dungeons. You don't want Glass Cannon because it makes you take so much more damage. And if you get it to the 4th upgrade rather than the 5th, it'll only give you 1 rank of Glass Cannon, but you get all the other upgrades. So that's what I'm doing. Alternatively, you could just upgrade it to the 5th level and just get the extra rank of Glass Cannon for the extra damage. We have the Ball Lightning Orbit enchant. I'm not using Tibalt's Will because Tibalt's Will does not have armor on it, and we need a lot of armor, upwards of like 14,000 for what we're doing. And getting 4 ranks to Ball Lightning is like somewhere in the range of 23% increased damage anyways, so we're only losing a little bit of damage, but we're also gaining Disobedience, as well as a ton of damage reduction and armor, which is pretty much mandatory. One of the ways that the Teleport enchant actually works, I should have mentioned this earlier, is by using boots that have attacks reduce evade cooldown. As you can see here, if I use my Teleport enchant while I have Ball Lightnings out, here, I'll get a few Ball Lightnings rolling. Anytime that I just attack, my Teleport enchant is constantly getting reduced just by attacks reduce evade cooldown, so I would not use Teleport enchant until you get this. If you don't want to use Teleport enchant, you want to use Firebolt or something, you could use Flicker Step, or you could use Esu's Heirloom for a little bit of extra damage. But ultimately, if you're speed farming, this is what you want. And you want Ghostwalker aspect on it. You want Taurasha, you can get the max benefit out of this with all the things that we have on our bar. Fire damage with Flame Shield or Firewall, Ice with Ice Blades, Lightning with Ball Lightning, obviously. And then we have Poison damage with Infection, Vampire Power. Recharging Loop, already mentioned. I put Storm Swell on the Amulet because 45% increased damage. I have Conceited on the offhand, 25% increased damage with a barrier up, and then I have Control for 35% increased damage. Alternatively, you can use Elementalist. I honestly cannot tell which one is better at this point. Probably Control is more consistent, but I'm having a hard time telling. But I'm going to go with Control, probably. When it comes to the rolls that you want on gear, on your helmet, if you don't have a Shaco or Godslayer, I would get all stats, cooldown reduction, max HP, and total armor percent, and then I would put on damage reduction against vulnerable or crowd-controlled enemies as your legendary. Raiment on the chest, obviously. On the gloves, you want attack speed, int, crit chance. Lucky at chance to restore resource or lightning crit damage is fine. On the pants, you want exactly what I have. Armor, damage reduction from close, ranks to Ball Lightning, and then you can slam Disobedience on there, which you pretty much need. I've been using an armor elixir almost all the time, but if you're doing tier 6s, the amount of armor that I have right now should be enough with Disobedience. Yeah, how much did I get to? 12.5k. My armor rolls are pretty low, like on here and here. Kind of low, but if you just slam an elixir of armor that you can craft like the 500 ones, that'll easily get you to like 13k, and that'll be fine. Or if you're using a normal legendary helmet, you will have more than enough armor. I'm always just crutching on the elixirs, to be honest with you. You could also craft 200 armor incenses. If we're doing tier 6s, you shouldn't run into too big of an issue. On the boots, you want movement speed, mana cost reduction, ranks of teleport, and you can either get movement speed after killing an elite, or you can get damage reduction while injured. On your weapon, you want to have a dagger because it has damage to close and the fastest attack speed. You want all stats, int, damage to close, and then you can either get vulnerable or mastery skill damage. On your offhand, you want crit chance, intelligence, cooldown reduction for your teleport cooldown. You can either get mana cost reduction or resource generation. Probably mana cost reduction is better there. On your one ring that isn't Taurasha, you want crit chance, damage to close, max life, and resource gen. Literally exactly what I have. Damage to close, alternatively, could be lightning crit damage, I think. On your amulet, you want to have total armor is really good so we can reach our armor cap. Cooldown reduction is just great so we have lower cooldown on our teleport. Ranks of mastery skills for damage with our ball lightning. And then right now I have ranks of conjuration mastery. You don't really want this. Ideally you want movement speed, or something that would give you damage would be elemental dominance. You could get ranks of glass cannon, but then you will start dying more. Alternatively, you could get devouring blaze, but we don't have burning up all the time, so the uptime on that is pretty weak. You could also get something like damage reduction instead of a rank to anything. That would be fine. Movement speed, like I mentioned, is also okay. When it comes to the Paragon board and where you actually want to put your Tears of Blood glyph, I'm probably going to mess around with this. For just to start, I'd probably just slam it in your first glyph slot because it's pretty easy to do. And then the glyph that I swapped with it was Adept. The other glyphs that I kept was, I kept Static Surge and I kept Control. Eventually, once this is level 50, which, oh my god, it's not going to be forever, but once it is level 50, you want to put it in the middle glyph because that has the most amount of stat nodes around, so you can buff it the most there. But for now, putting it in the bottom glyph is fine. It buffs non-phys damage. If you want to put it up here, it's probably fine too. I saved like 4 points not putting it there, but if you put it up there, it buffs damage to stunned. But then you have to get lightning res, which doesn't really do anything. Honestly, it doesn't really matter where you put it right now. I may do a little bit of math and figure out some optimizations there, but how it is, I think, is fine. I got control because it's 20% damage to stunned, and you get a lot of additive damage with crowd control, which is very good. I kept the Frigid Fate board. I straight up just axed this glyph. I lost Territorial as well in order to get Tears of Blood maxed out, which is more than worth it because 85% or 82 right now multiplicative damage, but that'll go way up as you level it. I kept Frigid Fate because it's 24% multi right now. And then I got some damage reduction versus vulnerable. Previously, I had enough dex for this. I don't know where it went. I probably need to fix some of my pathing, but this is a lot of damage reduction, and damage from Frigid Fate is nice. In this board, I have Reinforce for damage reduction. Get a pretty good bit of non-phys damage here, which is nice. Max HP as well. Non-phys damage also buffs Frigid Fate. And then I also got some resistance to elements here, which without this res, it's pretty much impossible to get capped unless you use like diamonds, or you buff some other nodes with resistance to all elements, or you take all the resistance on the board. But how it is how I like it. And then in the last glyph slot, you'd actually want to go the lightning one. I forget the name of it for general play. But for me, I'm using the damage reduction from burning glyph board because when I'm pushing, I like to use Firebolt enchant. But God, I forget the name of the board. It's like it has a bunch of lightning damage and stuff. I'll have it in the board that's in the description. Actually, no. Keep this board, keep this board because it has a bunch of damage reduction from elites, which is really good, and it has flat armor. That's the main reason that we go into this board, and then we max out destruction, which is a crazy amount of damage. I got some damage reduction from burning, but honestly, enemies aren't really burning, so you could omit a lot of these points here. And if you wanted to, you could maybe squeeze in a territorial for some damage reduction if you were to axe a lot of the points here, but you would lose a little bit of damage if you were to do that. When it comes to playing with the build, if you've played with the build or you've played any ball lightning build before, it's pretty simple. The goal is to just be able to spam teleport like a psychopath. If you have the build optimized, you kill stuff near instantly. One optimization that you can make while you're actually doing the Abattoir is you'll find shrines a lot, like protection shrines, artillery shrines, lethal shrines, whatever. You can keep those so that when the Bloodseekers spawn, which is pretty much the only obstacle is actually killing the Bloodseekers, you can just keep those shrines up, so whenever the Bloodseekers are activated, you can just pop one. For speed farming, I'd recommend keeping the protection shrines up, just in case you're worried about survivability. So what you can do is if you just run by a protection shrine, you can ignore the mobs there, you can pin it on the map, go kill some mobs, and then when you're about to finish the completion bar, you can go back to that protection shrine, kill those mobs, then the Bloodseekers will spawn there. You can pop the protection shrine, kill the guys with literally immunity, and then you'll kill them a little bit faster because you can play a little bit more aggressively. And then, yeah, that's it. Obviously, though, you can do that with any shrine that you want, and it's pretty much a mandatory strategy for if you're trying to push. But for now, for doing tier 6s, a lot of the time I don't even bother with this, but if you're like having a hard time and your build isn't optimized yet, that is definitely something that you can do. If you're having a hard time in tier 6s, I'd recommend just lower it to like a tier 5 or tier 4. It's not a big deal, but this is by far the fastest build that you're going to see for farming this, and this is pretty much the only thing that we can do right now. If you want to increase your power and you want something to do, just farm, upgrade this glyph until your eyes bleed. Unfortunately, there isn't really a more efficient thing to do. I wish the build was like, I wish there was an OP, insane, crazy build that could do tier 10s very efficiently or something, or like tier 12s in 2 minutes to get, you know, triple the amount of XP per hour, but It doesn't really exist right now until we level up the glyph more, and even then, it might just not be possible because the survivability requirement is very high, and when there's a high survivability requirement, you have to sacrifice damage. Other tips for playing with the build, just make sure to use Ice Blades on cooldown. Anytime that you get scared, you can just use Flame Shield, but you have a lot of damage reduction inherently, so you shouldn't really run into that many issues. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully you found it helpful. Let me know down in the comments your guys' thoughts on the Abattoir, how you have been enjoying it, if you've been enjoying it at all. Personally, I think it is a pretty bad implementation of something that could be good, but I might go into that in a separate video. I'm not really a fan of it. I think the scaling is way too steep off the rip, and if Ball Lightning is having a problem, sub tier 15, like getting past tier 15, I can't imagine what, a lot of like rogues or something are going to have problems with. I can't imagine they're having fun, right? Like, I don't know. I think it's a little bit steep. It's cool in some ways, but in some ways it's pretty cringe. I don't know. I might go into that in a separate video. Hopefully you found the video helpful. If you did, please make sure to drop a like, subscribe, blah, 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 and I will see you guys later. Peace.